The following is a fan-based review and is owned by Toei Inc. and Bandai. We claim no ownership to the material we are discussing and is based on pure opinion. Guys all set?
Always.
Huh? What?
We're recording.
Hey.
Pokemon. Hi, everybody.
Guys, we got a review to do.
So what level does Rockruff evolve? Is it 25?
25.
Okay.
During the day review.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Ow.
Now then, if you're ready.
You didn't have to hit us.
Yes, I did. It's the only way to get you away from that.
Okay.
Anyway.
Welcome to episode 19 of the Tokucast, everybody.
Welcome.
As much as preoccupied as we were.
Yes.
I'm gonna go ahead and move these somewhere else.
But
No.
I just found a burn here.
No.
I just caught a Rockruff.
I don't care.
I named it after my dog.
Did you actually catch it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I named it after my dog.
Good for you.
Oh.
Episode 19 of the Tokucast. This time we're doing our first Ultraman.
Mm-hmm.
Ultraman Nexus.
Yep.
Yay.
Currently streaming on Crunchyroll if you have any interest in seeing it.
Yes, or you can find it on Kiss Asian. This show was great. I had a lot less expectations going into it.
I didn't know what to expect because this is the first Ultraman I'd ever seen.
Came
away very pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, I watched.
And a heads up, as always, this will contain spoilers.
Yes,
as all of our reviews do.
Yeah.
So if you don't want this spoiled for you, go check the show out, come back, and see what we thought.
Yes,
we'll give you a minute.
We'll wait.
Okay. No,
yeah.
That was long enough. Anyway.
So I've been watching Orb, and Orb is...
That's the current one, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a little bit...
Also on Crunchyroll. I think they all are.
Yeah, they all are. Crunchyroll has a thing with them now where they get all of the Super Rai stuff.
Come on, Super Sentai, let's do it.
Yeah.
Kamen
Rider, let's do it.
Let's do it. Come on, Crunchyroll. Listen.
But Orb is just a little bit too comedic for me. And I went into Nexus... I started Nexus a few years ago, but I only got a couple of episodes in, I think. I started watching something else at the same time.
As long as you don't break the chair.
And then I came back and started watching this, and I was so pleasantly surprised by the show.
I mean, they both started it before I had a chance to, so I knew what to expect going in, but it wasn't the worst thing I've ever watched. It wasn't the best thing I've ever watched. I enjoyed most of it, but I have this big thing with Ultraman that I just can't get past.
For some odd reason.
It's just that I never like the look. I have yet to find an Ultraman I like the look of.
I like the look of this one.
Yeah. I love the helmet especially. It looks like a spark.
Even with the lips.
Even with the lips. It works more in this one because it's...
Yeah. It's like an actual...
alien kind of thing.
Yeah. Now...
I don't know why. I just can't get around any Ultraman look.
This show...
I don't like it.
Is a sequel to the movie Ultraman the Next. They do want to bring some things in. We didn't watch it for this review, but they do want to bring some things in toward the end of Nexus from the Next, because it's a direct sequel about 5 years earlier, prior to this show actually starting, because this show takes place in 2009. Now, let's start, because this is the first one, and we're going to start running into this a lot more once we get to the Heisei era Kamen Rider. It has two openings.
Mm-hmm.
One for the first part of the series and the other one for the second, and I like both of them.
They're both by the same band, right?
Yeah.
Doa, I believe is how you pronounce it.
I like the first one.
The first one I liked a lot.
Yeah, it's it took a little bit, but once it got to that chorus,
it's one of those things that I didn't really stop to listen to it, but if I didn't feel like skipping it, I didn't mind.
I was fine listening.
Yeah.
I really like the first one a little bit better than the second one. They're both in about the same tier for me. But that first one, as soon as it hits the chorus, it's just it sort of goes all out, because you got all the instruments playing in the background, and then you have the more acoustic version of it right after they do that, which I really liked. This opening was very, very good. The closing wasn't bad. I mean, it just existed, and I sort of skipped it more often than not. But
I don't think I ever listened to it.
Yeah, I think the opening had just more of an impact on me for this. Now, before we get into the show, we do have to talk about some things, because this show, as we saw, is a little bit more adult-oriented.
Yeah.
It reminded me of Ryuki in its tone.
but it got screwed badly. Because as it's a more adult oriented show, but unlike most adult shows, for some reason TBS, the Tokyo Broadcasting System, thought that adults wouldn't want to watch Ultraman, so they screwed the show over and put the time slot of it at 7:30 a.m.
Ooh.
Yeah, no kid's gonna get up at 7:30 a.m.
No, they do end up getting up at 7:30 a.m.
Oh.
But the adults,
Not in America, they're not.
yeah,
Yeah, we gotta remember that's
In
when
Japan, probably yeah.
Yeah, in Japan, isn't 7:30 a.m. when Sentai airs
Yeah.
too. So
Yeah, that makes sense.
yeah, so kids will be adults, not so much.
yeah. Like this, even though it is a follow-up to Ultraman Cosmos, the one before this, that show was just much more for the actual child demographic. This one was much more for the adult demographic.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of the normal 50 episodes this show was originally planned for, you could see that at the end of the show, they got screwed and it got shortened to 37 episodes instead.
Yeah,
But still, it's shorter,
Like,
which I didn't mind.
it was fine for what we got with it, but it's just like you could tell that ending was rushed.
a little bit. Yeah,
Yeah. Like, it's not a bad ending, but it was definitely rushed.
it's not in the ninja levels.
Yeah, sure.
Another rant for another day.
Yes, so many rants for this one. Oh, good God. Now, it did air later on, like, I think during the time that Mebius was on, at 2 a.m., like the regular adult time slot, and it did have better ratings at that point. But with that 37 episodes, just like, it got screwed on it. Now, getting into this actual show. This show's dark. I wasn't expecting it to be this dark because it starts off with us meeting our first, actual protagonist of the show, Kazuki Komon, who was a helicopter rescue person, and he had some previous trauma where he was basically almost drowned in water, and the fog that he was trying to go through reminded him of that.
Huh. As opposed to drowned in what?
Lava. This is not Minecraft.
So I had to ask.
But yeah, he basically ended up drowning in that, and when he goes to try to help somebody on the side of a cliff, the fog that is surrounding the cliff reminds him of that water. He starts to freak out really badly, and he can't end up doing the rescue. Mm-hmm. So he basically ends up leaving that job and ends up going to join TLT.
Which ended up being so much safer.
Yes, all of the safety. But
yeah, I mean, also their base is underwater.
Yeah,
that's true.
That is a great point, and I did not think about that. That's amazing.
That's the very first thing you see in the theme song is their underwater base. So.
That's amazing.
I
didn't even think about that. That's hilarious.
That's like somebody from Power Rangers Lightspeed Rescue being afraid of water. Then why are you here?
Now we end up meeting before he actually goes and joins the job itself. We end up meeting his girlfriend, Rico. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of things about her in this show that I really liked how they handled it. I was not expecting it to go this way. I'm sitting here I have to pause it and rethink about my life decisions because what? So we end up going and meeting the other members of the Night Raiders, who is the strike team they end up battling the monsters and everything like that. Mm-hmm. Nagi, who we know from Garo, she was Jabi, the best girl. She was the greatest character in that show.
I can't remember which one that was.
She was the first Makai priest who died and came back.
Oh, the one. Is that the one with the pistol? Or was that... Am I thinking of somebody else?
You're thinking of somebody else.
Oh god, all the girls kind of blend together, I'm not going to lie.
No, but I love Nagi. I thought Nagi was one of the standout characters for this show.
She was really good.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The one who died in that one.
Yeah,
that's right.
She died and came back.
When she got... Oh, yeah, because her death was... Oh, that was bullshit.
It was hard, but it was BS.
Please wait for us to record... Please comment if you want us to review Garo, because we will absolutely review
We will
Garo.
Definitely end up doing that. We're going to end up doing it when we get
next
Kabuto. We end up meeting the captain, Eisuke Wakara. Great character as well.
He just doesn't want to talk about the horrible spiral monsters.
Shiori, who in that special episode, we'll talk about we'll talk about that more when we actually get to her character. Mm-hmm. I was not expecting to like her as much as I thought I would, but she's a much better character. Mm-hmm. And Mitsuhiko Ishibori. That's a thing. We'll talk about him because that was a thing. This show has some twists and turns that are great. Mm-hmm. But Kazuki, the first episode, he doesn't really end up going with the Night Raiders that much. He meets them, of course, but he doesn't really end up going with them that much. And we end up
seeing... At least not in the beginning.
Yeah, we end up seeing a shadow of a person just randomly around. Nagi sees them. and it's Jun Himea, who was like the first host for Ultraman Nexus. Now, this show starts off with murder. Like, straight up murder. The monster is, like, in the tank of like an oil tanker.
Yeah.
And he comes out.
It's at a gas station.
Yeah. And he just ends up killing the attendant, like, immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And the other guy ends up getting away. And this is when we find out.
It's shot like a horror film.
Yeah. And it was
You got your monster POV. People are dying, but there's not a lot of flash and circumstance.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I want to bring up is people die a lot in this show.
Yes, they do. And
it happens on screen a lot.
Yeah.
You don't see that a lot in Super Sentai or Kamen Rider.
Coming from Kaku Rangers to this felt like such, like, the shift was so strong, but I felt like it was needed, because a lot of the shows that we've done so far has sort of been, you know, have the happy good luck feel to it.
But even something like Kamen Rider Amazons, which I'd say would be the darkest thing we reviewed other than this, even that, there's still a level of silliness to it. Because they still say the names of their attacks before they do them.
What about Kamen Rider Shin?
Yeah, well, that's true.
Yeah,
I'm just saying. I think that would be one of the darkest things we reviewed.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So my point being, there's still it still feels like a Kamen Rider show. It still feels like a kid show, just more violent.
Yeah, Shin did not have that.
I'm talking about Amazons.
Yeah, I know.
This in particular, this does not either.
This feels like a legitimate adult level show. And I think
nobody's saying the names of their attacks before they do them. There's no...
Well, I think that's Ultraman in general. They don't end up saying like their finisher or anything like that.
But they still don't do it. It's still different than what I'm used to hearing.
Yeah, it's so refreshing watching this in comparison to a lot of the other stuff like we have Rider and Sentai in a whole. But it's just like with this, I've never really watched an Ultraman all the way through before. But watching this, I'm like, I sort of want to watch more now. But getting back to this show, like the monster ends up killing these people and ends up going away. Now that's the thing about this. The monsters don't always end up dying the same episode that they're introduced.
Yeah.
They'll come back. Or they'll like end up getting away because the first episode, when Komon's like, we end up going to this cliffside and these people on our bus are all, they were like drunk and everything, and then the monster ends up showing up like in front of them and kills everybody on the bus. Like they're just all eaten at that point. And then you end up seeing Komon come up in like a van or something. I think he's driving to the tilt base. We'll call it that from now on, by the way. And he ends up going up to the bus trying to see if anybody's on there, and the monster attacks him. And the next thing you know, like the monster's just about to eat him, and a giant fist comes down.
It's a knife.
No, it's like there's a legitimate. It's Ultraman.
No, I thought it was the knife that stabbed the monster, and
oh no, it's just Ultraman.
I remember it being the knife.
No, that happens later.
It does?
Yeah. There are multiple versions of this monster. But the first time you end up seeing the monster, like, about to attack Komon, Ultraman's fist just comes down and just annihilates it. There's just a giant crater in the ground. I was saying, like, that is the best introduction.
It was pretty awesome.
Character because he was... I love the fact that Ultraman doesn't end up talking that much, because you end up getting moments like this, and then he just looks at Komon, and it's just like, okay, I get it. All right.
There's a couple of moments like that.
Yeah.
A couple of moments where Komon and Himea as Ultraman just have like bro moments where they look at each other and are like,
okay.
Yeah.
So I have to ask you this then.
What?
Who did it better? This or Kabuto?
This. Kabuto didn't do it until episode 2.
Fair enough, but still.
Yeah, it's just like in that first episode, I think this is such a great start to this series because, I mean, yeah, there's like hope as an actual theme of it, but it's not put into your face like something from Wizard or even in some cases Kuga.
Wizard.
But it's just like it does it so well with this show in itself. I just love how he got introduced and just how everybody ends up reacting to him. Because Nagi doesn't trust Ultraman. Because to her, it's just another beast. And she has some trauma from prior where her mother was killed by a beast about 15 years before this series ended up actually starting. I just like the first couple episodes are all really, really good. Because this show is very character driven. It's not Monster of the Week based.
It's not Monster of the Week. It's not Victim of the Week either.
Yeah.
Which is a problem a lot of Neo-Heisei Kamen Riders have.
All the victims are dead. So,
I mean, the ones that they save, they get their memories erased Men in Black style.
Yeah.
So.
Yes, this show does the memory erasure thing, and the reason that they end up doing it is because they think if people end up finding out about Ultraman or the Beast, like, it'll end up causing mass hysteria.
Well, one of my favorite episodes in the early of the show is when Komon rescues that little girl who had the stray dog.
Oh, yeah.
And they erase her memories, but he sees her at a hospital the next day.
Because he doesn't know that they're doing it.
Yeah, and he doesn't know that they're doing it, and the dog, like, runs away, because the dog recognizes him, and it runs up to him, and he's like, "Oh, look, Taro," because that's what he named the dog when they met each other, and she's like, "That's not his name. Who are you?" And I was like, "Oh."
And the look on Komon's face,
yes,
it's just like, you just broke him a little bit. He just, it's sad. Like, this show has a lot of things with real emotion, and I think that really helps, like, drive the narrative in its own, because a lot of things at the beginning are really all about Komon, and then they end up transferring to another character for basically the second half of the series. I love when they, because they do have, like, their own flight machines, like basically any other Ultraman, they end up having, you know, jets and everything, and this one ends up combining into a bigger one. But when Ultraman first comes up to them, and Komon sort of already ends up knowing, you know, more about the character, or Ultraman is like, he's not here to hurt us. But Nagi and basically everyone else in the company doesn't trust Ultraman.
They think he's a beast.
Yeah, they think he's a beast. Even though they just saw him rescue 2 people, they think that he was just taking it away from the beast so that he could eat them later. But the first thing that he ends up doing when Ultraman and the giant beast are fighting, Nagi comes up and shoots him. And I'm sitting here like, I guess you can. Like, this guy's over here trying to help us, and Ultraman just looks at her and is like, really, though? And
he can't emote, but it's like...
Yeah, like, you can tell.
You serious?
And, like, Nagi's shooting him, and Komon gets in front of her and is like, no, he's here to help us. It's like, how dare you get in front of me? I'm your commanding officer.
Right.
Get the hell out of my way. And, I love the way that this first part of the show is just like, none of us end up trusting Ultraman. They end up having to build up to that trust throughout the rest of the show. And, that's one of the things I loved about the show is that there's no filler. Yeah.
It's very episodic in nature, and you have to, or serialized in nature,
yeah.
You have to watch the previous episode to get context.
Yes. And now our previous character, the Ultraman host, Jun Himea, the first one, he has a pretty dark background as well. He was a previous war photographer. And I don't know where he was, but he was out in the middle of someplace, and he ended up basically, after he was getting injured, bonding with this girl. And this girl was taking care of him, and like later on, he there's a whole bunch of fighting and everything, and Jun has to go take some photos, and the girl, Sarah, is like, no, Jun, please don't do that. So Jun is like, no, I have to go do this. It's my job. He goes off to do that, and Sarah ends up following him. And like, he's taking the pictures, and he sees her in one of the pictures. He's like, Sarah, what the hell are you doing here? And she's like, Jun. And he's like, Sarah. And then she gets blown up. And I'm sitting here like, so that kid.
And he gets the photo, and he takes a picture of her right before it happens.
Yes. And that ends up, he still ends up using, that was the one thing I got confused on, because he still ends up using that photo in part of the photo set that he gave back to his job before he ends up quitting. Now, he does end up getting injured during that time, but we also end up finding out while he's injured that he ends up getting in contact with Ultraman Nexus, because he ends up being like...
He finds the relic.
Yeah.
The relic that gives him his powers.
Yeah. So he ends up getting bathed in the light, and he ends up getting the weapon, or I guess like the transformation device. It's sort of...
It's kind of both. It's a gun, it's a dagger, and it's his device.
And that's how he ends up getting to become Nexus. They end up going back to the area where Komon first found... It was Komon and Nagi. They end up going back to the first area where he found like that bus where the beast and everything. And he sees like a whole bunch of reporters taking pictures off of the side of the railing. And this ends up bringing like the whole concept of media and how they end up controlling it into the show. Because they said that everybody in the bus ended up going off of the cliff. They weren't eaten by a monster or anything. They were all thrown off the cliff and they all died at the bottom. I was like, how in the world can you actually do it? Because they do that multiple times throughout the show up until the very end, where they end up, when somebody ends up dying, they end up giving a totally different reason for it by spreading it to the media. It's like they know that something has happened, but the way that they end up presenting it would end up being sort of like a normal, everyday, I guess, circumstance.
An accident.
Yeah, an accident or missing or something like that, instead of being eaten by a monster. That's the story that the MP, the memory police, that are like the memory police of Tilt, that's the story that they end up giving to the media. I love that.
Am I the only one who thought of that one guy from the Incredibles? The one who always had to relocate the family after they... Race memories, relocate, money. I was like, can he show up, please?
That's
basically what they were, but I just wanted that one sarcastic asshole about it. Money. You just make us waste money.
It's true. Now, let's talk about Ultraman's suit. I love it.
I like it too.
Especially the helmet. The helmet reminds me of like an actual soldier.
My issue with... It's not a bad suit. It's not. And I'm looking at it right now. It's not a bad suit. My issue with Ultraman is that I didn't like the look of the first suit of Ultraman. I didn't.
That's the Junus form.
That's the Junus Red form.
Yeah. I didn't like the look of the first Ultraman suit, and they decided let's pretty much not change a single goddamn thing about it.
But they do.
You know what
remember,
I mean?
that's the first Ultraman suit from 1966.
You know what I mean, though. Like, from basic concept, yes. But hold on, moment of silence, because this does deserve some respect for going on this long.
It's 45 years. Because it's just like, you got 5 years of Ultraman, then Ultra 7 and Ultra Q or whatever, and then Kamen Rider in 1971, and then Super Sentai in 1976. So everything's 5 years apart.
I think it's mainly the eyes that bug me. I don't know why.
I like the eyes.
I like the eyes too.
I also like how when he goes to his Junus form, I like how he has the gem on the chest. I like how it flashes red when he's low on health.
Yeah, and this Ultraman has this thing, for those of you who aren't familiar with it.
Sooner adopt by Kamen Rider X8.
The color timer. And usually with the color time on the other ones, it's based on actual time. Like, he can only hold the form for about 3 minutes or so. In this one, he can basically hold the form indefinitely as long as he's not injured or hurt. So it's like the color time is basically just a health monitor in this case. I really like that, because that was like my problem with some of the other Ultras is the fact that color timer is, one, loud, and two is the fact that he can only stay in that form for so long.
It actually goes doo-doo.
Yeah, and this one is just like, I can stay in this form for basically however long I want, as long as I'm not super injured or anything.
And the gym's like, you dying.
Yeah.
Stop.
Now, that one is added onto after he ends up going into the Junus Red form. Before that, when he's in the green form, he ends up having the color timer.
I think Enfin is the name of it.
Yeah,
the forms have kind of weird names.
The color timer itself is the actual,
it's
the thing on his chest, the figure, I guess, in this case. Now, a couple of episodes in, we end up finding out that there's another Ultra on the planet with them, a Dark Ultra. And I love the way that this guy is introduced, because Ultras can change their size.
Which I didn't know.
Yeah, I didn't know either.
I didn't know that.
I was like, wait a minute. Why aren't you 50 meter? Oh. But he ends up changing his size, and he's like, they're in this place looking for a whole bunch of monsters and everything, and Komo's just out. I think he's coming back from seeing his girlfriend or something like that. And this one is named Mephisto. Oh, it's false. Faust first. Mephisto's the second one. He ends up coming in, and he just walks behind him. He's invisible. And Jun and Komon are there, and the guy just ends up coming up behind them. One is really tall, and Jun can sense him. So he ends up shooting at him, and Faust is just like, no, I'm good. He's just like, I love how evil the actual Ultras are, and I like the way that he looks. He
looks like an evil jester.
Yes, he has the clown.
He has the curved toes on the shoes, but also the horns.
Yeah,
and the black and white kind of Harley Quinn-esque.
Yeah, like the Harley Quinn diamond patterns.
I was like, oh, well, you look cool. But he's basically there to just end up killing them and absorbing Jun's light, and that's basically ends up the theme of this entire show. It's light versus dark, legitimately light versus dark, and what is controlling the beast that ends up coming behind there. Now, I'll end up talking more about the movie beforehand, because I end up reading a summary about it and how it ends up affecting the end of this show. Because the first time that Komon and Nagi end up meeting Jun is in that forest when they're about to get attacked by a whole bunch of beasts, and he's like, you gotta get out of here, you have to run. And Nagi doesn't trust him, of course, because at this point,
why would you at this point?
Yeah, she's sort of already figured out. One, she has seen him a few times, just around in the shadow or something. And it's like, you're the one who's been following me this entire time. And so she, of course, tries to kill him, because she has figured out that somehow he is connected to the beast. And he ends up going into this after they get away from the beast, or they kill them. He ends up going into like this spaceship and ends up flying away, and that's how he ends up recharging. We'll say that to a point. The way that they first end up meeting him is like just the most hilarious thing ever, because Jun is sort of an asshole the first little bit.
Yeah.
He just comes in and it's just like, I'm here to save you, but I don't want to talk to you. And okay, I guess you could do that. But after Faust gets introduced, because that happens pretty early on in like episode 7 or so, we end up figuring out that with Riko, Kazuki's girlfriend, there's something going on with her. Because she, like, there's this whole scene where she's about to have dinner with her family, but the lights are turned up too bright. And I like the way they do, like, the atmosphere for this one, because it's just like, why are the lights so bright here, but it's like, it doesn't look real. But they don't explicitly tell you that this isn't a real thing. And then we end up going on just a couple episodes down the line after he's fought Faust a few times that Riko died. She died a year ago. And she has these dog tags from someone, Mizurogi, who was a previous deputy captain of the Night Raiders. I love the fact that, one, she's dead. He's been dating, like, a few days after she met Kamon, she ends up dying. And, like, this big monster ends up coming out and ends up basically just murdering her entire family.
Her and her family,
yeah. But he doesn't end up murdering her. It's Mizurogi, who by this point has been turned dark, or has been, I guess, possessed by Dark Mephisto. He's the second Dark Ultra in this show. And Mizurogi just straight up shoots her dead in the face. I was sitting here like, this show is just not giving a shit. People just should have get murdered. She's been a corpse for the entire year. Literally corpse bride.
Yeah.
And
corpse girlfriend.
I love the way that Kamon ends up finding out, because there's like this whole psychological torture scene where he ends up going basically into her mind, because he goes to her apartment and sees the entire place like basically just torn apart.
It looks like almost like a mental patient's room at a mental ward. Yeah. Because there's just like weird, crazy drawings just all over the walls.
It's just
or the mom from Stranger Things.
And there's no there's no furniture. There's just the easel and the drawings everywhere. It's pretty freaky.
It is. And then you end up having that whole scene. He ends up going and picking up one of the pictures, and like this whole thing of darkness is coming and taking over him. And he starts to hallucinate. He ends up seeing like monsters everywhere, and June is nearby, and it's just like, come on, you had to snap out of this. So he ends up seeing him, and he's like, you need to move. I'm trying to kill all these monsters. So June basically ends up shooting him with like some ray of light that ends up taking the darkness off of him. I love that scene, because seeing him just like flailing and everything throughout the entire place he's at, it's just like, this feels extremely powerful for the show in itself, because this show goes really hard with its characters and how, one, if something dark needs to happen, it's like it doesn't feel forced. It feels extremely natural.
It also can be just a metaphor of him having to fight all this evil on his own, to the point where he's just flailing around uselessly, because no matter how hard he tries, there's always going to be something else to try to take over.
Or it's just like something else to try to take over his girlfriend, because that's exactly what happened. As soon as she ends up dying, Faust ends up just taking over her body, and basically doesn't end up doing anything different until very near the end. I'm guessing something must have happened after the first time that Faust ends up fighting Ultraman. There's one thing we didn't mention. Ultraman will end up taking, he ends up having a whole other dimension that he ends up taking the monsters into. Mm-hmm. And the first time that he ends up trying to do that to Faust ends up taking him to the dark version of that dimension. Mm-hmm. And I'm sitting here like, why in the world do you keep trying it every single time? Because from then on out, it's just like, okay. Now, the first time that he ends up actually doing that, and one of the members is Kamon, of course, ends up getting transported into the light dimension with him. Kamon's stuck into a rock. But he can witness the fight that he's having with Ultraman throughout the entire thing. Yeah. Speaking of which, I've watched some other Ultraman, especially Orb. They seem really slow-paced when they're like actually fighting in the larger form. Mm-hmm. But with this one, especially when Nexus is fighting like the Dark Ultras, it's so fast.
One of the things I loved about the fights is there's not a lot of flash. It really felt like two people are just slugging it out for their lives. Yeah. And they're not overly choreographed.
Yeah.
And they don't... words.
I mean, you have to have like the flight scenes where they're like actually flying around, but they don't look bad because it's all CG.
There's not a lot of CG in the show.
Yeah,
there's a lot of practical stuff.
It's like that's the only time they end up really doing that, and I like it because it actually looks pretty good.
But even like the first time you see Ultraman fly and he's just like firing all those projectiles at Mephisto down on the ground. That was pretty incredible.
Yeah. They're just like, this is so well done. Congrats to the fight choreographer. Small claps.
Or the CG artists.
Yeah, either one. Really.
Both.
But June has been having some issues of the past late. Because one, Tilt is trying to capture him to sort of see exactly what powers Nexus as a whole. And Jun has been getting damaged pretty heavily, and transforming into Nexus is taking a pretty heavy toll on his body. And, it's pretty well warranted at this point, because he's been fighting a lot of these monsters. They've constantly been coming back. And almost every single time, it's like a couple times they end up coming back really close to each other. That's something they end up exploring later on as well. But Jun is just like, I don't know how much longer I'm going to do this, but I'm going to do this as long as I possibly can because I'm legitimately here to protect people. By this point, Nagi has stopped trying to shoot him every single time she sees him in the face. Mostly.
Shoot him in the face every time she sees him.
Yeah. Now,
Sees him in the face.
I love that first scene where he first meets Faust because Faust is like invisible.
Yeah.
And he comes up just walking through this field while the Night Raiders are fighting another monster off in the distance. And he just comes up walking in this field, and Faust is just a normal-sized person at this point. And he just comes up, and it's all slow. He's like, who the hell are you? And he's just like, Faust. I'm sitting here like, oh, I guess he can.
Lovely to meet you, Faust.
One thing I will also notice about that, we're going off a little bit of tangent, but I promise I'll come back to the story in just a minute. It's still an Ultraman, no matter what. Even if they end up having a female host.
Which we later find out Faust is.
Yeah. It's just like...
Why?
I guess you could be the reverse of this that one story in Sailor Moon. But we like in the last fight. In the last fight between Nexus and Faust, Mizurugi has already sort of made his appearance, and Nagi has a really big history with him. One, because she was the one who ends up taking his spot, and two, because they sort of had a pretty big history together.
Yeah. And he was her commanding officer when she first joined the Night Raiders.
Yeah. And
they had a relationship.
He trained her and everything. And then, they end up finding out that Mizurugi has come back after Rico ends up showing up randomly in the forest after she transforms back from Faust and ends up giving her these dog tags. And Nagi's like, where'd you get these? How the hell did you actually end up getting these dog tags? This person has been gone forever. And then basically Mizurugi ends up calling her back out after he ends up jamming the signal of the illustrator, who's a young man who has ESP powers and he can make holograms of himself.
There's always going to be someone with ESP powers, isn't there?
Yeah, it's true. But it works well for this show because it comes up more towards the end of it. He ends up having the connection with the second one, the second dynamist of this one. Now, and we end up... Okay, so Nexus ends up fighting Mephisto after the first time that Mizurugi ends up transforming into him.
By the way, great name.
Yes.
Mephisto, Faust, Nexus.
The last one is named, I think it's Azael or Lucifer. Like the Dark Fall.
Oh, right.
The last Dark Ultra. They end up fighting for the first time. And then there's this whole thing where Mizurugi is trying to start the apocalypse. And he's like, people have...
most bad guys are.
Yeah.
Of course.
People have been getting abducted around the city. And he's basically... I don't remember what it's something Latin that they end up connecting it to, where they end up going around all the places that people have been killed are in a pattern. And the last place is where the apocalypse is supposed to start out of. Now, Nexus, June ends up going in there, but he's pretty well damaged. He can't stay in Nexus very long anymore without, almost dying every single time. They end up going to where the apocalypse is supposed to start. They end up going into that other realm, or I guess dimension, where the place is. And he ends up having to fight the monster here, and Mephisto at the same time, and he loses, and it's pretty bad. And I love the way that...
That's something Ultraman does that a lot of other Kamen Rider and Sentai don't do. Lose.
Yeah. Like
you don't see that a lot in other shows.
He legitimately loses, and at the end of that show, he's strung up on a mountain.
Yes.
Just hung up like Jesus.
Like cross arms and everything.
Or, what's his name from Greek mythology? The one that was...
Prometheus.
Yeah.
We'll talk about him later. But yeah, it's they end up having that whole thing. I'm saying here, he's legitimately strung up on a mountain. He has no energy left. Mm-hmm. It's his color timer is constantly blinking. He can't even transform back because he's being held.
And his friend from the newspaper where he used to work, she's there too. Yeah, on the mountain with him.
He has this whole thing because he has two friends who he previously worked with. June did. One is trying to figure out the mystery of the beast, and he ends up getting his mind wiped after a bit because there's this whole chase scene.
I love that his chase scenes and him trying to get away from the organization that does the memory wiping.
Memory police, yeah.
And when they finally corner him and he's just like, just that moment of acceptance where he realizes I'm gonna lose my memories.
Yeah, but Mizurogi has a scene that his friend is basically the only one that he ends up talking to from the newspaper, not the guy, the girl, and she ends up getting taken away. And, Mizurogi ends up taking her into the Apocalypse dimension. And she's there. I liked her character, by the way. Mm-hmm. She didn't really have to do much, but she felt useful.
She really cares about June.
Yeah.
And you feel the connection is real because the actress does a really good job.
Yeah, it's there's no useless characters in this show. Remember that. Remember that, Kamen Rider and Sentai. There's no useless characters in this show. Everybody has a point. And so the only way that they figure out that they can end up giving any energy back to Ultraman, they have in their combined mode, they have this giant cannon on the back that they can basically just shoot at the monster, and it's the same level of strength as Ultraman's finishing move, which means that they can sometimes end up going ahead and actually finishing off the monster themselves. Mm-hmm. In this case, they end up transferring it to pure energy after they end up getting through that dimension and going into it, and they shoot Ultraman with it and basically just charge him back up like a battery. And
which I thought was awesome.
Yeah. That last fight scene between Ultraman and Mephisto, where they're flying through the air and everything, and Mephisto shoots up this one ray and splits into a whole bunch of other ones, and you just see Ultraman dodging and everything. I was like, this is amazing. It was so well done. And then there's that last scene where Ultraman goes up and Mephisto's charging his laser. And he ends up shooting, Ultraman comes up and cases his whole fist with light and punches it, and they both just basically disappear at this point. And Komon's he doesn't believe that June is dead by this point, and he appears to him throughout the light and everything. He's no matter what, there will always end up being an Ultraman here to help people and basically to be here to save the world. And that's the last time we end up seeing of June for quite a bit. And that's the end of the first arc of the show. In the second arc starts off especially after that episode, it starts off a lot more happy-feely. At least after a certain point, because they end up having this whole thing, because June was previously captured by TLT after the previous fight that he had with Mephisto. Yeah. And they end up taking him in and almost end up killing him. And I love this entire scene of him just strapped to the table and then trying to get him back. And then he finally ends up turning into a ball of light. He ends up going out and actually ends up escaping that way. The second half of this show ends up starting off with another person who ends up becoming Ultraman, Ren Senju, who we also know, his actor. He was the third The Bee and Punch Hopper.
Oh.
Yeah. I was that's...
Remember when he died?
It just keeps happening with that.
Yeah.
It's you can't escape it. He was also an orphan on Confies.
So, yeah, dead.
It's you just die in everything, don't you?
But was his death as bro as it was in Kabuto?
No. No, it wasn't.
Will it ever be?
No.
Yeah,
but he's a lot younger. But with the illustrator, the man who we mentioned earlier, they both went to the same school in, I believe it was Dallas, Texas. And
I thought it was in Colorado.
I thought it was too, but apparently it was in Dallas. But they were...
No, yeah, you're right. That's something else happened in Colorado.
Yeah, something else happened in Colorado.
That was with Nagi and her mother.
Yeah. And we end up finding out that he's basically like a prodigy child. But
what?
A prodigy child.
There you go.
What did I say?
Prodigy.
Oh, whatever. Close enough.
That's what I heard.
But
it's not an episode of the Tokucast unless one of us has a word flow.
It's true.
I'm just glad it wasn't me for once.
But he feels...
Shut up.
No time will come.
Yeah, sure. He feels, especially after June, he feels sort of like a breath of fresh air that this show needed. Because it's like a lot of the things were really, really dark. After, like, there's this whole thing with Komon earlier where he ends up being, like, mentally tortured by Mephisto. Mizurugi to, like, Riko ends up blaming everything on him because just a few days after she met him, she ended up dying. There's that whole scene in his mind. There's a whole scene where he ends up walking through a door, and this is the first time that he ends up meeting Riko's parents.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just puppets.
Yeah.
Like, they're legitimate mannequins just sitting in chairs. I'm sitting like, that's creepy.
That was creepy.
That was extremely creepy. Great
Also,
scene, but it's creepy.
It was really creepy, especially with right now with the mannequin challenge and everything. I'm just like, oh, really? We're doing mannequins?
Well, I thought it was a little more creepy, especially...
I've never heard of that, but this is also years before that was a thing.
Yeah, no, I just meant in terms of the time of me watching it.
Oh.
Especially because the entire thing, Riko is like sort of like when she
Also,
was
don't
still...
look up the mannequin challenge. Save yourself some brain cells.
Yeah, when she was still...
when
she still had her own consciousness separate from Faust, she was questioning who she was, and Faust is like, you're a puppet. And I'm sitting here like, okay, that's some imagery. That's legitimate.
As long as it's not, what was it, Die Ranger puppet imagery, I think we'll be okay.
Yeah, sure. But we end up meeting Rin for the first time. And he's a lot more naive than June. He's like, and there's a reason for that.
He is much younger.
Yeah, he's a lot younger.
He's like 17 or 18.
But there's this whole thing where after he first transforms into Nexus, and he's getting the blue form, which is a lot faster.
I really like June as blue.
Yeah.
I think it looks so cool.
It looked cool. And that first fight with him just like dodging lasers and everything, and just running behind the guy, I thought it was great. And that whole first thing is like, he's very reckless while he's fighting. And there's a reason for that, because we'll get to that in just a minute. Now, there's sort of like a deputy... there was a girl earlier who like ended up... Oh, there's that whole scene where the little girl and her brother are with their family. Komon had previously met them while they were at the zoo. He took a picture of them. Mm-hmm. And there's this whole scene where the parents, they end up getting into a car accident.
Rough.
Yeah, the parents end up getting killed.
This whole thing was rough.
The little girl and her brother end up getting away, but they all end up going home, and there's like the parents are there. They don't remember anything because the memory police have wiped some of their memory of that part. And it's so strange because of the fact that their parents are beasts. Now, beasts can basically just end up taking over anybody after they end up getting killed. And there's this whole scene where they're like running through the forest, and the monster, like the main monster, ends up coming back, and the parents like sort of absorb into the monster, but the little girl's between them, and she ends up going into the monster herself. And I was like, "This, what?" That was one of the. It was just so rough because seeing that girl just like being battered back and forth between like the pulsating of the monster. I was just like, "This."
That was icky. And scary.
Icky.
Yeah,
that was icky.
It was.
I'm not saying it was.
It just felt so rough. I've never been just like, one, because that little girl was not a bad actress, like especially for a child.
This show had good kid actors.
Yeah, they really did, because it's like that whole scene. I'm sitting here like I felt so bad for her. I'm sitting here like, what if he ends up killing that monster? And he does, and little girl is basically just straight up just injured.
Yes,
like she's on a stretcher and everything, and her brother ends up going after Komon because he blames Komon. Because Komon was the one who was shooting the monster.
Because he wasn't able to kill the monsters earlier. Komon wasn't, because of that psychological block, because Riko had died. And now he finally gets over it. He kills the monster, and what happens? You almost killed a little girl.
And her brother just...
You got over one trauma, and now you are right into another one.
He was like, the little brother is like, don't kill my parents and don't kill my sister. But
and the little brother just runs up and just starts punching him. And I'm just feebly punching him. You almost killed my sister.
And you can see the look on Komon's face.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's just like, he doesn't know what to do.
It hurts.
This show
legitimately hurts.
Does so good with conveying emotion. Because I'm just like... Basically, the entire time I had to keep pausing it and like looking off into the distance, thinking about
do that, but
because I'm just like, this. It's just so guttural with the way they really handled this show, and I loved it. because especially coming off from Kaku Ranger and like a lot of the other things that we've watched, it's like they don't really end up having that moral quandary a lot in a lot of these shows. I mean, Tsuruhime did with her father, but it doesn't feel like on the same scale as it did with Komon and Riko and this little girl and everything. But the little girl ends up playing sort of a big part because after Mephisto ends up getting blown up, Mizurogi loses a good portion of his memory. He doesn't remember who he is or anything. But this little girl, there's a deputy memory police who's under the woman who does most of the memory erasing. And she didn't do the memory erasing correct. She remembered, because usually they'll get rid of anything that has relation to Ultraman or the Beast. Mm-hmm. But in this case, she ended up she messed up somehow and got rid of all her previous memories. Instead, like, she doesn't remember her parents, and she only remembers Ultraman and the Beast and Komon. And I'm sitting here like,
how did you fuck that up?
Do you mess? I thought it was like pre-programmed or something. You messed up something. It's
not like the neuralizer in Men in Black. You gotta set the date and the time and shit. It's just done.
She messed it up somehow.
Good lord.
But
who knows?
The little girl ends up finding Mizurogi. He's like hiding out at a temple or something. She like gives him a piece of fruit and he's really hungry. He starts eating the whole thing. And they end up going off and having their basically own little adventure. Now, TLT knows by this point that Mizurogi is still alive because there have been sightings of him. So they end up going to try to find him, and they Komon and Nagi end up finding Mizurogi. No, it was Komon and the captain and Nagi end up finding Mizurogi. And there's this whole scene where the little girl started having flashbacks about Komon and everything that happened to her parents, and she like runs off. It's just her reaction to him is just, and look on his face afterwards, because he remembers who she is, obviously. But it's just like, he doesn't believe that someone went in and running away from him like that, because he thought that her memory got wiped correctly. And that entire scene, Mizurogi ends up getting captured, and is getting taken to the base. And of course, Mizurogi does end up getting his memory back. There's a pretty good fight scene, like an actual just human fight scene, where he ends up fighting off all the guards. And the director, who's been a main character this entire time, has come up and, like, one thing I'll say this is just a Japanese thing versus an American thing in kid shows. They use actual guns.
Massive air quotes.
Yeah, especially in this case. They use actual guns. And Mizurogi just tries to shoot some people.
Yeah. Like, even in Sentai Power Rangers, like, with Gokaiger versus... Super Mega Force, where the blasters had actual gun sounds.
And bullets.
Bullets, but in Power Rangers, they were lasers.
They were pew, pew, pew.
Pew, 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 and not bang, bang, bang.
Yeah. Now, the deputy police girl has
more Pokemon where they have to completely ban
cut out
the episode.
scenes.
They have to ban entire episodes.
Okay, the one with the seizures was understandable.
No, not that one. I'm talking about the ones where they use guns.
I know, but I'm just saying the ones with the seizure that induced the seizures was understandable.
Yeah. But in this case, the deputy MP, this happened a little bit before.
Don't say Pokemon, because I will get up and go get it.
I will punch you in the face and keep you here.
That'd be worth some views, wouldn't it?
That got escalated quickly. But back to
I
this.
know, but...
Ren ends up meeting the deputy police because she's been sent to keep watch on him this entire time. And Ren is hilarious. Because he'll, like, go off and come back and, like, the bear panda. So, because he works at an amusement park.
Yeah.
And it's hilarious the way that, because he just ends up basically stalking her for a little bit. And he has a psychic power as well, where if he ends up going to a place where things happened before, he can touch the ground and, like, see what happened before there. And he ends up seeing...
there are some scenes I would love to see that happen.
Yeah.
With certain areas.
But
it'd be funny.
But yeah.
It'd be a different show altogether, but it'd be funny.
Definitely wouldn't be a kid's show.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, not at all.
Exactly my point.
But
it'd still be funny.
In this case, he sees her, like, wiping people's memories. And the first thing he asks her after he meets her is like, so, how long have you been wiping people's memories for? I'm saying, like...
I kind of work.
Ren don't give a shit.
Let's get right to the point.
Yeah, it's great. Now, he ends up going... Ren ends up going off after the whole Mephisto thing because he's really childish, but he's also really smart. He helped one of his coworkers out with his homework and everything, and I thought that was pretty hilarious because he gets, like, DNA, and he has basically an eidetic memory, so he can memorize basically anything. Now, he ends up going off, to basically just end up helping out, and he ends up fighting the monsters himself. Ren does. Back to Mizurugi after he is about to escape. There's a whole nother Ultra where one of the memory policemen ends up getting overtaken by Mephisto's Zwei, which is 2 in German.
Zwei.
Yeah,
Zwei, sorry.
Zwei.
Viva Zwei!
But Zwei, yeah. He ends up...
In Zwei.
He ends up fighting him, and...
Still not me.
Oh, Christ.
Ren has this whole thing with something called Raphael, which is something a little bit more from the Ultraman the Next
I didn't know the Ninja Turtles were in this.
Shut up.
Yeah. He's gonna hit me. Oh, okay. I'm just glad y'all didn't both go for that.
That would have been hilarious. That would have been great.
I didn't into that already.
I am so abused.
Now, after Mizurugi ends up getting out, he still has the powers of being able to turn into Mephisto.
Mm-hmm.
And he ends up going out. He helps Ren fight Ultraman Zwei. And
Zwei.
Is it Zwei?
Yes.
It's Zwei.
V-I-E. Via.
No, it's Z. No,
Z-W-E-I.
I know.
Zwei.
But he ends up going out, and Mizurugi has been injured.
Zwei.
Like he got shot in the...
There's no Zwei.
He got shot in the
Feng
side or
Zwei.
something.
Comes Zwei.
He got shot in the side, so that... Any injury that she basically ends up sustaining either in Ultraman form or in human form will come with you to whatever form you're taking next. Like in the earlier episode, Jun got stabbed in the leg, and it stuck with him as he transformed back into his human form. And Mizurugi got stabbed in the side, and he ends up getting constantly hit in the side by his doppelganger, basically. And he tells Ren to shoot him. And Ren's, because like the previous with Jun, his finisher was basically just, the standard Ultraman finisher. But I really like Ren's because it's an arrow. It shoots him and it just goes straight through him and cuts him straight in half. And Mizurugi ends up basically telling him to kill both of them because, that's basically the only way that he feels. One, he knows he doesn't have that much longer. And two, it's an easier way to make sure that they get rid of basically everything that has to do with the dark version of him at once. I love this scene after he ends up, like Ren ends up shooting them both, and the darker one is killed. And Mizurugi ends up like coming down to this forest, and Nagi ends up finding him. And Mizurugi was basically controlled just like Rika was. After everything happened with her, but he didn't, become a corpse or anything.
Or die.
Lucky him.
But Nagi ends up finding him in this forest, and she's like, "No, you don't get to make me feel bad for you while you're dying." I was like, "You did so much
after what
wrong.
You've done?
Yeah.
No."
And I'm thinking, like, you really can't turn off your emotions like that. But it's such a good scene.
It
like,
is.
just them, and then him, like, disappearing into light, basically, because he's finally come over to the light side, where he's not a Jedi. But I love that scene. I think it's incredibly well acted and everything. It's just like, this is the end of Mizurugi. It's just like, he was an antagonist, but it wasn't completely his fault. It was basically Mephisto just taking him over. Now, there's been this, this whole thing with this man following around Ren and, like, taking pictures of him. And previously, when Ren was at the school in Dallas, he was friends with the illustrator. The guy who is, I guess it's CIC, who, like, handles everything for the Night Raiders on the side of, like, this is where you have to go and everything.
Right.
And there's this whole thing. They're sort of connected in their own way because, they both have psychic powers.
The CIC, Combat Information Center.
Yeah. And I love the scenes they end up having because it's like the illustrator ends up sensing that someone is behind him. And he's like, "Who's there?" And
Batman.
I said that like twice while I was watching it.
I'm Batman.
Or if Marcus is watching, it's Zwei.
I'm Zwei, man.
But that whole thing with the two of them, it's like we end up having a flashback where Ren ends up trying to escape the facility, and the illustrator has like some sort of way that he can sort of see into the future just a little bit. And when Ren is like, "You should come to the ocean with me, we can get out of here," and the illustrator's like, "No, we don't really have any chance of getting out there. I've seen it." And Ren is just like, that's just one of many possibilities. It's not set in stone for that to happen.
We have the power to change the future.
Yeah, I mean, he does end up getting captured by that point. They end up bringing him back, but before they end up taking him away, he gives the illustrator a shell, showing that he made it to the ocean like he said he was going to.
Mm.
I love that scene. It's just like it shows that not everything is set in stone. Not everything is set in stone like the illustrator said it was going to. Now, one of the last couple episodes of this show, there's been this whole thing where this dark vortex is just like appearing over monsters and constantly ends up giving them power ups or something like that.
Mm.
And it's called Unknown Hand by everyone with the Night Raiders. And throughout one of the last portions of this show, they end up having someone come from America, who's like one of the TLT operators over there, with this guy who Ren knows, along with the illustrator, and they were apparently like he treated them really well while they were all in America. And this lady ends up bringing back the events that happened in Ultraman the Next, because the big monster there, who's named the One, was basically just the big bad. He was the one who was fighting the Ultraman of that movie, and that Ultraman and this one are the same being. It's just like this is a devolved form of Nexus, who's a devolved form of another Ultraman who ends up showing up at the end of the show. And her husband was the host for that monster, and she was like, "I've seen the destruction that can be caused by this." Like, because basically the entirety of Shinjuku was destroyed during this movie.
Bless you.
And she's like, I get the fact that not everybody who ends up being Ultraman is a bad person. She ends up bringing up the guy who was the Ultraman previously. He's like, he was a good person. Everything about him was, this is just good things. It's so, like, seeing her and the things that she had to go through, it's like, this doesn't just end up affecting just the people who turn into beasts. It ends up affecting the people who are close to them. And I thought that was great.
I did not want to start over.
Now, they have been saying someone has been taking, or someone inside the organization has been basically a spy for them this entire time. And the guy who was taking pictures of Ren, basically looking out for him the entire time, was like in this room saying that Project Raphael, whatever was affecting Ren, has been solved and they can go ahead and actually cure him. And then before he can leave out the room, someone comes into the room and shoots him.
Mm.
I was thinking, like, everybody gets shot. Now,
you get a bullet. You get a bullet.
Now, and just going on from there, it's like that vortex has been showing up, but it usually just shows up after Ultraman takes them into the other dimension. In this case, there's a small vortex that ends up trying to come underground and go into this room where this thing is kept. It's basically the thing that the visitors created. It's called Leth, or Lethe, or something like that. And that whole thing was the Ultraman, who is, the actual evolved form at the ending of the show, went to another planet, and the people there, called the Visitors by the people on Earth, tried to create something as a copy of him. But they messed up. And that thing ended up turning out evil and tried to kill everybody. And so they basically just end up trying to blow up their entire solar system to get rid of him and escape to the Earth, and they do so, whatever is left of them. But they end up keeping Leth, because Leth was destroyed at the end of, we'll say destroyed, put that in quotations. It's destroyed at the end of the Ultraman the Next movie, from what I've read. Please correct me in the comments below if that's incorrect. But they end up keeping the thing underground inside the tilt base. And that's not the best idea, because something keeps trying to constantly break into there and try to get the thing out, and that doesn't work. Then we end up going to the big vortex end up appearing overhead over a major city. And they can't get to it in time. So this thing comes out and just starts shooting rainbows everywhere. And not in terms of gay pride, I mean just killing everybody with rainbows.
So like Dr. Kemp rainbows.
Basically, yes, that is very, very accurate. Reading Rainbow came and killed you. But
did I not?
Yeah, it ends up taking up everybody, and like anybody who's getting caught in the light. Yeah. But
LeVar, I love you. But do it.
the memory police can't get to everyone in time, so people start to riot because this thing is starting to kill everybody in the state. The armory comes in, start to block everybody, try to control this information, saying that...
Gosh, it's almost like what would actually happen if giant monsters invaded a city.
But the people end up trying to escape, and the army won't let them, and the media is trying to portray this, so people are out there like taking pictures and posting it. It's like, no, this is actually happening. Don't trust the media, what you're seeing right now, because they're lying to you. And Ultraman ends up coming out. He ends up saving people. And people are like, who are you? Is like, and Ren, of course, can't say anything. As Ultraman can't say anything. But Ren has this whole thing, and this is the whole thing with Raphael. Once he gets to the age of 18, like, his cells start to deteriorate, like, really rapidly. And it starts to kill him. And that's his birthday is coming up. So by the end of this show, that's really starting to happen. I love the whole scene where after the first time he's trying to fight this thing and it ends up, taking it off into space basically, and going back up to the vortex. They are in this place after they had like sort of gathered Ren, because Ren was almost ended up taken by Tilt as well. Well, no, he was, and they tried to do the same thing to him that they did to June earlier on the show. But the Night Raiders ended up revolting and ended up taking him and leaving. And there's this whole scene between Nagi and Ren where Nagi is like, you can't keep fighting. As he said, he's a very brash fighter. He just heads straight in without really thinking about doing anything else. Like, Nagi's like, you can't keep fighting like this. You have to fight as if you're not going to die. You can't keep fighting as if you're going to just end up keeling over at any moment. And that's basically his entire thing. He realized that he has no time left, and he's just going to end up fighting and trying to stop this as best as he can. But Nagi's like, you have to fight smart. You can't just keep rushing into everything. So during the last fight between that monster that ended up came down from the sky, they ended up bringing back another monster who basically both June and Ren had fought at some point earlier in the show. And there's this whole scene where he's fighting the both of the monsters at the same time, and they end up combining after he ends up beating them, and the combined monster has basically everything from every other monster they have fought throughout the rest of the show. And I mean, he ends up killing that monster, but Ren basically just like, that was it for him. Like, as soon as he ended up transforming into Ultraman, his timer started going off basically immediately. And like, his body just couldn't take it anymore. So he does end up defeating this monster, but after that he just straight up collapses. I was a little bit disappointed in the scene, and there's a reason for that. Because I thought that he was going to die. And I felt a little bit gypped.
So you promised me death.
No, it's like,
I'm disappointed.
It felt like that was going to happen, and it just didn't. And I was a little bit disappointed in that. Now, the next person who ends up getting the thing is Nagi. And her whole thing is to fight with hatred, because the monsters feed off fear. You can fight fear with hatred.
Or willpower.
Yeah. And she ends up going down, and by this point...
Nice Green Lantern jerk, by the way.
Yeah, he gets it.
Yeah. We end up figuring out that Ishibori is the one who, 15 years ago, killed her mother and her father, and basically everybody else at the compound he was at, because there was previously a scientist there.
Dun, dun, dun.
But I love that scene after they end up finding out, because Shiori has like seen him, like, she's like, you've been smirking a lot recently. And then he pulls out a gun and points it at her, and he's like, good work. And she's like, oh, you're just jumping. And she just gets shot. I'm sitting here like, damn.
Well, alright then.
She just got straight up shot, and everybody starts to panic. And I love this final scene because Nagi goes down, because he goes, Ishibori ends up going down to end up going to find where Leth is being held at the bottom of the compound. He ends up going up to it, and Nagi ends up becoming the next host for Ultraman. She ends up going down there and tries to fight this thing, but she's an idiot. They told her not to do that, and she ends up getting captured by Leth. And I love this scene because Ishibori ends up turning into the last Ultra of the show, the Dark Ultra, and he ends up going out and, basically just causing a whole bunch of damage. And there's this one scene where the captain is, because, usually everybody in the Night Raiders is out going off to be able to fight something, and Komo has gone down to help get Ishibori out as she's, Nagi out as she's being drained of her life. And there's this one scene where the captain's about to go out and like actually start fighting, and you look over and there's no one beside him. And I'm sitting here like, that's amazing. that's great cinematography, and it shows such emotion because he's not used to going out by himself.
Mm-hmm.
And so good. And then after the last Dark Ultra ends up getting appeared, Nagi ends up handing over the Henshin device to Komon, and he ends up turning into all the other Ultras. He turns into the base form of Nexus. He turns into June's. June is red. He ends up turning into Ren's. June is blue. And then he turns into Ultraman Noah. The last Ultra that we get.
The last Ultra in the last episode.
Yes. And I thought it was great. It's just like, it shows that he's...
Personally, I thought June is blue looked cooler, but hey, final form's the final form.
He's all silver. But it's just like, I love the fact that, because he's been the main character, and I love that because usually we just end up getting the actual Ultra as the main character, but it's not him. It's Komon, who's been like basically the main character.
He's been the main character since the beginning.
He's basically Kagami from Kabuto.
That's what I was thinking too.
Kagami!
Yeah, it's like Ultraman Noah is like, he's extremely powerful. He's the oldest living Ultra at 350,000 years. And he's incredibly strong. I love that whole scene where he and the Dark Ultra are fighting. He punches him, and Noah punches him out through the stratosphere into space. And they end up, having, of course, a big beam battle like any other Dragon Ball Z episode just showed you. And he ends up just destroying the Dark Ultra. Mm-hmm. And that's basically the end of the show, because we're going to skip into a year later, and we show that because that last fight between the Dark Ultra and Ultraman Noah is like, you actually have the people, the actual civilians. Like,
beasts are now common knowledge.
Yeah, it's like
they're attacking heavily populated areas. The Night Raiders are going to these populated areas. Yeah. They're taking out the monsters.
But I love that final scene.
Pretty awesome.
Before the 1 year time skip, because you see all these people like cheering on for Ultraman and everything, cool. And like you see the memory police lady just close her phone. She's like, can't do any more damage around this popsicle stand. Yeah, and and like we end up going to a year later. One, Shiori's still alive. I thought she was straight up dead after you shot her.
No.
But like they're going out and telling people where to go. There's like, there's places that you can go to to hide away from the monsters and everything. I was like, this is great. Like the show. Really, it's not its fault that it got closed down. It had low ratings because it got screwed.
It got a bad time slot.
It got a really bad time slot. And it's just like, it had so much going for it. Like, the director and the producer said that they would have been able to go for the last 13 episodes where they could have gotten, like, why Ultraman needs a human host, what really happened to Ren. Like, they would have done a lot more with him, and a lot more with Komon as Ultraman at the very end. But it's just like, I felt it ended on a good note. I felt it ended on a very, very good note. I
really like that last scene where Komon gets in front of the kid.
Yeah.
Shoots down the monster and tells him, like, don't give up.
Yeah.
Something like that.
It was so good. This show is amazing. Let's do the characters really quickly. Komon's great.
Komon is a really good protagonist.
Every time I heard his name, I thought one thing.
What did you think?
Komon.
But it's like,
Ultraman.
I love the fact...
Come on, Forza!
Get the fuck out.
No.
But I love the fact that a lot of the things that we got in this show are basically from his perspective.
Yeah.
It's like, seeing everything from a third-person perspective just really helps it. It doesn't show, like, you're this all-powerful being. You're the one who has to be there and take care of everything else while that all-powerful being is fighting these monsters. Mm-hmm. Nagi was great. She had a lot of character growth through the show, a lot more than I thought she was going to. And I really appreciated just how she ended up doing. Like, they would have been able to do a lot more with her at the very end because she was only in Ultraman Nexus for just such a short amount of time. Mm-hmm. But it was still a really great thing that they could have done with her. The captain was a great character. He was the one who was like, you gotta listen, and we're trying to help these people as much as we can, but we understand that there are some things that, one, we're not doing correctly, and two, that are just coming off straight wrong. But we have to see what we can do with what we're given. Mm-hmm. And that whole scene where he finally decides to go and get Ren out of the experimentation room that they were doing on him, it's just like, it shows how much of a powerful character he was. Shiori doesn't get much in the show proper, but she gets a lot more in episode 31 and a half. Where basically this entire thing is focused on her and her past and how she got into the Night Raiders the first time around. I thought she was much more of a ditzy character who was like good at weapons and everything. But
she is kind of like the girly girl of the group.
But she had that whole thing in episode 31 and a half where like her previous love life finally came up. Like the guy that she liked, his memory got wiped. He ended up going for another woman and things like that. That final scene, because she has a nervous tic where she'll pick her nails, and like she'll constantly end up painting them. There's the last scene of episode 31 and a half is where after she like paints her nails and everything, and Ishibori ends up coming in and she just starts like crying on his chest and everything because she wasn't ready for all of that to happen to her, and I completely get that. It's like so much has happened to her, and she lost so much getting into the Night Raiders. She lost a lot of her happiness, and and
she still remains upbeat in spite of it all.
I felt so much more respect for her as a character because I thought I really wouldn't like her that much, but then they had their whole episode just dedicated basically to her, and I was like, I get it now. I get why you're actually a part of this team and why you are actually, really, really useful. Ishibori was I was not expecting that twist because I was not expecting it to be him to be that final Dark Ultra, Dark Zagi, and I was just like, that's a great twist that I don't think anybody saw coming. Jun, the first one, he was Ultraman. He was a very stoic character. He didn't really have he had a very.
He doesn't have a lot of lines.
Yeah, and there's a reason for that.
But his backstory is fleshed out pretty well, I thought.
And Ren, if they would have had more time, we would have gotten more on him. But from what we got, I felt like we got enough on Ren as a character as a whole. Right. And I just thought it was great. This show, definitely watch it. It's so worth it. It's like, if you like Ultraman, or if you really just like Kamen Rider Super Sentai, just go and watch this. It's so different from basically anything that we've reviewed so far. It feels more on the line of Garo than
Sentai or Kamen Rider. Yeah,
it really does.
But I think that wraps up the review. We are approaching 300 subscribers very quickly. I think he's going to go get our belongings. I want to just put a request out. If there's anything you want us to do special for our 300 subscriber video, please let us know in the comments.
Yep.
And you've been good, so you get these back.
Yeah. And join us in episode 20
when we will have all the alcohol
for Choriki Sentai
Ranger.
And of course, the week after that, we compare it to Zio. All right, I think that's the end of this episode. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.